So you saw in our presentation earlier how to do some of our sampling methods, and what we're going to show you right now is actually we're going to take you out into the field and show you how some of these are done, and we'll show you the correct way to do them, and we'll also show some mistakes that people make commonly when they're out here sampling. So first of all, what we're going to show you is proper sweep net technique. And what you want to do is get a good grip with both hands on your sweep net. And this is really important because what you'll see a lot of people doing sometimes is they come out and they just want to use one hand and use their sweep net like this. Well, that's really not doing much in terms of catching insects properly. So you're going to want to get a good grip with both hands on the sweep net, and you want to make sure when you come through with your sweeps that you get down in the canopy. You don't want to be up here too high. You want to get your sweep net down in the canopy and make sure the whole area of the sweep net hoop is down below the canopy of the beans. Another important thing that I want to show y'all that a mistake that people commonly make is whenever they sweep, they overlap the same area and don't get a good they don't get a good area in between each sweep, so they overlap. So if you're sweeping the same area, overlapping your sweeps, you're really not getting a good representative sample of the bug population that is actually out here. So whenever you sweep, you want to sweep at a pretty brisk pace to make sure you're getting room in between each sweep. Also, whenever you take these sweep net samples, you want to make sure that your net is tilted whenever you're coming through here and hitting the canopy. If you're hitting like this with your sweep net tilted out, nothing's falling in this net right here. You want to make sure that your net's tilted like this, so whenever you hit it, the bugs will actually fall in there. So you want to make sure you have a good angle each time you come through here and you make a sweep. So I'll show you a proper technique right now. Now, if you saw in that, I got good spacing in between each sweep. And I wasn't doing what we talked about before, where you're overlapping and you're just sweeping the same area over and over, disturbing where the insects are in front of you. So this is what we caught. This was just on a few sweeps. This wasn't, you know, it's common to do 25 sweeps when you're actually sampling. But as you can see in this, we caught several stink bugs. They're pretty bad in this field. There's like a southern green stink bug nymph. We have some greens and southern green adults. This one is a pest. It's a pretty serious pest right now. This is red banded stink bug. Has a lot of soybean farmers worried in the southern states right now.
You got 2 stink bugs in the middle of a mating process.
Sure enough, right there.
Can I explain what that is?
They're just making more stink bugs. Let's see, we have some soybean loopers. You can tell them by their 2 pairs of pro legs down there and the looping motion they make whenever they walk. There's some other caterpillars will do this too, but you got to pay attention to the 2 pairs of pro legs in the back. This green clover worm, you can tell how they act. They like to wiggle whenever you touch them. This might have been talked about in the soybean section. It's very diagnostic of how they act. Their behavior is always in a wiggling motion whenever you play with them.
The way you're holding that net to count them up.
Yeah. This is a way that I like to hold my net whenever I count them. Another thing I want to mention in proper sweep net technique, whenever you go through here and sweep, if you're not catching any, if you're not pulling any leaves off the plants and getting them into your sweep net, you're not doing a very good job. But also, you don't want to go through here and be like a weed eater, ripping all the leaves off the plants and hitting them too hard. You want to find a good middle ground on getting a few leaves in your sweep net, but you don't want to just be tearing the plants up or not. And then I'll
give us an example of
okay.
what looks right but it's not
yeah.
quite right.
And so when I'm coming through here doing these sweeps, I'm getting a few leaves in here, but a lot of times you'll see people come through and they just don't have very much force, which really isn't knocking those bugs off of the plant. But then sometimes you'll see people come through and they like to just see all the leaves flying off the plants. That's a little excessive in my opinion, but you want to find a good middle ground of how hard to hit those plants. So right after I sweep, what I like to do is I'll keep the sweep net like this, and you see I got a few leaves down in there, but I like to come through and shake those leaves off, and I kind of examine them as I pull them out to make sure I knocked all the bugs off down into my net. And so after I get most of the foliage that got in my net whenever I was sampling, I'll pull them out, and I like to hold the net like this with my arm through it, kind of making the net smaller and smaller as I pull it up, and it helps hold it open. And then I can start going through the smaller leaves, kind of separating them out. And so then whenever I start counting insects, I'll just flick them off like that. So that's one stink bug. There's a southern green nymph. There's a red banded. And as I'm counting, I like to count the insects and I throw them out, so then you don't count the same one twice. As I go along, I'm just throwing out some of this foliage that is kind of getting in my way of seeing the insects. So some insects move depending on the time of day. We're kind of finding out that maybe these red-banded stink bugs like to be lower in the canopy when it's cooler and earlier in the morning, and might like to be higher in the canopy during the warmer parts of the day, which is the reverse for most types of stink bugs. Commonly in rice, the rice stink bug likes to be higher in the canopy early in the mornings, and as the daytime temperature increases, they move a little farther down the plant to stay out of the heat of the day. So what we have here is a drop cloth, and for example, this drop cloth is 2.5 feet in length, and it's typically used in cotton, and we use a black drop cloth in cotton, but I'm also going to show you how to use one of these black drop cloths in soybeans. So whenever you're sampling, you sample both sides of a soybean of a row. That equals 5 row feet with 1 drop cloth. So people call these different things, shake sheets, drop cloths, but I'm going to show you how to use one. What I like to do is I'll put my drop cloth down on the ground, and all the beans or plants, you know, whether you might be sampling cotton too, within the length of the edge of the row, I'll bend over the drop cloth And I like to use my hands. Some people like to use dowel rods to help beat the plants over the top of the drop cloth. But I go through and I shake these plants really good, and then I'll lean them back, and I only do one side at a time. So I'll shake this side, and I'll come through and I'll count my insects on one side. So we have red-banded stink bug nymph. There's a brown stink bug nymph. There's some other kind of stink bug right there. And you can see a bunch of these stink bug nymphs on this drop cloth. And what a drop cloth can give you over a sweep net whenever you're sampling is some insects, such as the soybean looper that you're seeing down here on this drop cloth, is that they like to feed on the bottom of the plant. So sometimes using a sweep net isn't the best thing for insects that are down in the very bottom of the canopy. This goes for some insects like red-banded stink bug, which a lot of people have been finding farther down in the canopy. And so you might not be getting a very good representative sample of how many insects are in your field with insects that like to stay lower in the canopy. So after I do one side, I count my insects, because I don't like to do both sides, because a lot of times the adults will have time to fly away before I'm able to, if I shake both sides, it gives them time to get away. So after I count my insects on the first side, I'll bend the second side over and I'll shake them over the top of the drop cloth. You can see stink bugs, and so then I'll go through counting those, and I'll either throw them off the drop cloth, or in the case of some insects, you'll just squish them so you don't count the same ones twice. So whenever I do a drop cloth, I want to go to a representative area of the field. You don't want to get in some area that might have been a low spot where water had stood on the field. You don't want to go to a spot that might be growing a lot better than the rest of the field. You kind of want to go to a representative area of the rest of the field. And whenever you come down to do your drops, an important thing to mention is that when you bend these beans over, you want to shake them, don't break them. And so I'll lean these beans over the top of the drop cloth, and you want to shake them hard enough that you're knocking all the insects off, but you also don't want to shake it hard enough that you're breaking the plants off. And you also don't want to have your beans slapping the drop cloth down here, because you might be killing small bugs and making them harder to see, or knocking other insects off the drop cloth that you would normally count. So this is an example of how to shake them, where I'm shaking them but I'm not hitting them on the drop cloth. And so once they're counted, I like to kind of pop my drop cloth and start out with a clean one on your next shake. And you want to sample a different area of the field to make sure your insect population is equal across the field. In some cases, you may have insects on one side of the field and you don't have them on the other, so you may be able to save yourself a spray application by only treating half the field, or a small strip of the field. All right, so now we're gonna move from our soybean fields, and we're gonna show you how to sample some grain sorghum. So this is an example of sugarcane aphid. It's a major pest of sorghum now. It only came in within the past few years and became a major pest of sorghum.
Now to camera, they look like a mat.
Yeah.
If you touch them, will they disperse?
No, they just kind of hang out. So sugarcane aphid is becoming a major pest in sorghum, and it has been a major pest these past few years. But what we do for sampling for it is you can commonly see honeydewed areas where the sugarcane aphid is present, and so sometimes those are good areas to start looking for them. But we go through to each to individual plants, and all you do is look for aphid masses, and you can see one right here. There's a few throughout this field. This field's kind of late, but you can see the sooty mold from their honeydew from the aphids that were here earlier this year. And so right there is a small population of some sugarcane aphids. Sometimes you'll get out here and they will be at extremely high populations where every leaf is almost solid. There's a few more mats of them. So when sampling for sugarcane aphid, typically the populations start lower in the canopy. And so what I like to do, and a lot of consultants, they'll typically have a sweep net on them. But if you come underneath here, and I like to use a sweep net handle to kind of raise up the bottom of these plants. And what I'll be looking for under here is some sugarcane aphids. And typically they'll start in low numbers. See, here's some at the bottom of this plant right here. And if you use this, use a sweep net to flip up multiple plants at a time, it kind of helps as opposed to just using your arm and seeing one or two plants at a time. If you look over here, you can actually see some getting good and started over here. On these plants. So when we're sampling for headworms, a lot of times we'll have a sampling bucket. It'll just be a small gallon or 2 gallon bucket, and it really makes it easier to sample. But today I'm going to show you how to do it with a sweep net. And what you'll want to do is you bend a sorghum head over into your sweep net or bucket, depending on whichever one you have on hand. And I like to put my knee under the side of the sweep net, and I'll kind of bang that head against my knee to give it something solid to hit against, to make sure I dislodge those headworms into my net. And so I'll just go through and I'll sample 10 heads. Right now, we're looking fairly clean. So I'll kind of go through some of this, make sure I'm kind of not missing anything in all these anthers. But it looks like we're pretty clean in this field. No worms. Yeah, there's none in here, but in a bad field, you can have some pretty extreme populations. Actually, there we go. There's a headworm right there. There's one.